My name's Chelsey Moon. I come from the Ban Mills Indian community. I am 30 and I work in healthcare.
Chelsey Moon, thank you so much for joining me today. And the conversation will be about blood quantum. And for the people that don't know, how would you define blood quantum?
I explain to people who are unfamiliar with it that it's similar to the pedigree of a dog. People will refer to dogs as like being full-blood German Shepherd, or say half German Shepherd and half, I don't know, Chihuahua or whatever. Beyond that, I say it's essentially a mathematical equation where you take the fractions or the percentages of people that you descended from and take half of their quantum, and that applies to you. So for Native people, let's say a grandmother is a full blood, your parent would take half of hers and you would take half of your parents, so it can only decrease from there. It was created by society in the early 1800s, maybe even earlier, because back then there wasn't a lot of intermixing. You would typically get with people in your community, so everybody kind of had their own races back then. It ended up turning into something that the white dominant society could use against people. So if they were using it against people of Black descent, they would apply like the one drop rule. So if you had even just a little bit of Black blood in you, you were fully Black. And then for Native people, if you had just a little bit of non-Native blood in you, then you weren't Native. It turned in from that into using it against people. And knowing what we know now, blood quantum, or like fractioning people's races, isn't scientifically accurate at all. So it came from how society viewed race, and basically how they viewed these people in these hierarchies, and how to use their quantum for or against them.
Thank you, Chelsey. I appreciate you giving us that explanation. And why exactly is this a problem?
There's a large problem with people claiming to be Native American or have Native American descendancy when they probably don't. This is largely a problem that's different for white people who claim to be Native American and Black people who are Native American and aren't believed. And so it's just like a fear, or just a writing off of people by other Native people. And unfortunately, that really affects people who are mixed, because it's not even just about not being accepted. When you're not accepted into communities, into your community, then you miss out on a lot that you should be entitled to, like different rights and protections that Native people have by the law, or community functions and access to healing spaces and medicines and things like that. So it becomes a controversial issue because there are people that rightfully so get ostracized for pretending to have Native ancestry when they don't. And then there are people who wrongfully get ostracized when they in fact do belong in those spaces. And people who are for blood quantum, they're worried that if it becomes too opened up, then anybody, including liars, can get into tribal enrollment and things like that.
Are there other issues that ensue because of blood quantum? What are some of the attempts the community has taken to avoid, quote unquote, watering down the bloodline?
Definitely, like, interbreeding is not something that we should be doing. And I'm not even saying that from like a morality standpoint, like how people just view, I hate the word, but incest, not just how they view that as like morally wrong, but genetically you can run into some problems with too many people being related. And I'm not saying that that's like the case right now and that, all natives are inbreeding, but I mean, down the line, if that's our only option, it's a problem, because when people choose not to engage in that, then they're ostracized. You know, much like I spoke of natives who are mixed being ostracized from their communities, then you have natives who choose to mix being ostracized and being denied rights and opportunities and things like that. And not just that, but just being treated badly as well. I have 3 kids, and my second 2 are with a white person, and there are a few times where people made nasty comments to me for doing that.
I am so sorry you had to experience that, but would you be comfortable sharing what happened?
So I used to work in a restaurant, and I was discussing with some of my friends back in like the kitchen area blood quantum, and at that time I didn't know as much about it either. Like I would still say like, oh, I'm half. Like I would tell people what it was. I didn't like believe in it, but I didn't not believe in it. Like I didn't think about it that much. And I brought up the conversation with them, like, why are natives the only group of people that talk about how native they are, like what their quantum is? And after we had a discussion, this person, he was the dishwasher and he wasn't like even in the discussion. And I mentioned he's a dishwasher because he's like off on the side of the kitchen. I go to walk by him and he was like, you know why natives care about our quantum so much? Because people like you keep having kids with the white man. So it bothers me that anybody would really look at them as like less native because they're involved. They know more of their language than I do, but somehow, you know, they're less than me.
Being that this is a system implemented by the government, do you believe the government has the best interest in Native Americans? More specifically, do you believe this is a form of institutionalized racism?
Yes, it started with racism. It perpetuates with racism. It's my belief that they're trying to make it end with racism as well. And it's institutionalized because where resources, identity, allocation, like things like that, it's not all in our hands like they promised that it would be when they said that we could become sovereign, have our own nations, and determine who is enrolled. They said everything was going to be up to us, and now it's up to them in too many different ways to count because every community has their own issues.
Do you think that in the next 100 years, the Native American community would essentially become extinct in the eyes of the federal government?
For some communities, yes, and for some, no. The government has already terminated like hundreds of tribes in the last, almost 100 years. And they're in the process of terminating some right now. Communities who base their enrollment on blood quantum, they're only like losing population because so many people are, I don't know if there's a term for this, they're quantuming out. I don't know. I suspect that eventually, if there's only, 17 people in the government, they're not going to view that as legitimate, which, I mean, I do. If you only have 20 people in your tribe, then that's your community, that's your tribe. But the government, they don't have those same views, for one, and it would benefit them to get rid of that tribe.
Thank you so much, Chelsey. And is there anything else you'd like to add?
Yeah, when people think of genocide, they picture violent bludgeoning and actively killing people. But a silent genocide or passive genocide would be through litigation or through paperwork, washing away somebody's identity over time. They're applying mathematical equations to determine that there's less of us when we are standing there legitimate.
And to conclude our podcast, how do you personally feel about blood quantum?
I feel like it doesn't impact me as much as it impacts like my children. It could impact my kids because of the fact that I had them with somebody who is not native. Now they're perceived as less and they might not qualify for their rights and things that they should be entitled to. Anybody down my line now, for 2 of my children, they're only going to have their blood, diminished unless they have babies with another native person. Regardless if there's a biological standing on native race, we're still placed into these communities throughout history, and now we're dealing with where we were placed in this racial hierarchy.